Very good.
Okay, I think we're about good to go, and I want you to meet Lance Finch also, who is the person who set up all the technology. Lance is going to get us started, and then he's going to bow out. So what I want to do right quick, just for the benefit of setting the stage, is to show a couple of film clips, and that'll orient you a little bit to what my class already has been studying. So
I share the screen first, and they can see.
Okay, now this is going to let you see the film clips along with us. And Lance, do I go to the VLC or do I just go to Synology?
Yeah.
Synology. Okay, what I have in the way of film clips to introduce the topic, which probably doesn't need a lot of introduction, it's certainly well known. The students in the class were intrigued by the movie Zero Dark 30. So I've got just 90 seconds of that movie, which shows the CIA, the composite CIA operative, looking at various tapes of interrogations, assembling bits and pieces to put together her view of Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti. And this is what the movie shows.
Yeah, okay. Some of these brothers have done some bad things. All I want to do is I want to separate them from the people like you. Definitely, yeah. All right, a guy called Abu Ahmed from Kuwait. Yes, I remember him. The nice guy. How close was he? What was his relationship to the leadership? I don't know. You guys are ready with the leadership. I don't know, sir. I have no idea about it. That's something you don't need an idea about. When you met Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, was this one of the facilities? Is this Abu Ahmed? Yes. KSN your boss. Mukhtar, Tato, you say Potato, I say KSN, you say Mukhtar, okay? After Mukhtar was captured, where the boat went to? Well, then I believe he went to work for the Sheikh.
Okay, the movie is basically 2.5 hours of the virtues of enhanced interrogation techniques. The pictures of Abu Ghraib, of course, are, I think, well known around the world. PBS did a documentary on how this developed a few years ago, and this is just a little bit, again, to introduce the method.
Tried innovating. In a controversial move, he created specialized interrogation teams and told them to get inside the heads of the detainees.
He brought in behavioral scientists who were psychologists and psychiatrists, and they were looking for psychological vulnerabilities, soft spots, ways to manipulate the detainees to kind of get them to cooperate, and looking for sort of psychic vulnerabilities and cultural vulnerabilities.
Miller's staff also gathered medical records. His interrogators tried to engender depression, to disorient detainees, break them.
Where the thing goes south for me is that when you have people who are either psychiatrists or psychologists who get into this gray world of what can you inflict upon somebody that might elicit information, that to me is where you cross the line.
The detainees fought back. There were...
Okay, all of that, of course, is well familiar to General Irvine, to Colonel Kleiman, to Ms. Hawkins. I think it's, as I say, pretty much familiar turf for the entire world by now. We've all seen the pictures from Abu Ghraib. And so what my class has been reading and studying is general concepts of international criminal law, of which torture we were able to spend, two days roughly on the topic. But it feeds into a lot of other things that are familiar to law students. So what I'm gonna do now is turn things over to General Irvine. I've already introduced all three of you to the class briefly, but I'll let David take it a little further. As I've told the class and many other people in Salt Lake, David happens to be one of my personal heroes. And we've been on a number of different panels and presentations together, so it's always good to have him with us. General Irvine is one of the leading figures in this entire debate around the country. So, David, I'm going to let you take it away for now. And we'll turn the camera around so you can see the class after David gets going. Should we do that now?
That's fine.
Yeah. You don't need to see David, I don't think, do you?
If you want to hear him though, it's better if it's facing.
Oh, okay. So we'll leave it this way for the moment. Okay.
You may want to stop the screen sharing if they're not using it, just so they can
Stop
see him.
sharing here.
Yep.
Okay.
Just so they can see you.
All right, there we go. I'm going to leave it with you, and I'll be in the audience.
Okay, call me if you need.
Okay, thanks, Lance.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us to be present this morning. When Wayne talked with me about being part of this particular class session, and I think the first email about it that I saw said something about the hunt for bin Laden. And it occurred to me that there are a couple of other people who are particularly well qualified to speak to this topic. And we were really fortunate to be able to persuade Colonel Steve Kleinman and Catherine Hawkins to join us. And let me just very quickly tell you a little bit about them. I worked with Catherine for about 3 years on a special project that the Constitution Project, a group out of Washington, D.C., had put together a task force to study abuses of detainees who had been in captivity under U.S. control since the beginning of the War on Terror. This was a bipartisan task force and some very, very interesting people on it. And Catherine was one of the investigators who helped us with a lot of research about this. And one of the things that I've always been impressed with about Catherine is that she has a mind like a steel trap and virtually a photographic memory for detail that would escape a lot of people. And in this kind of a discussion, I think that is particularly helpful in order to separate fact from anecdote or fact from fiction. Catherine took a Bachelor of Arts degree, if I'm not mistaken, from Yale University, got her JD from Harvard. Steve Kleinman is a gentleman that I have had the pleasure of working with and associating with for a number of years, as a number of us have been involved in questions of American torture. He has 30 years of operational and leadership experience as an intelligence officer with assignments worldwide, and is the recipient of Central Intelligence Agency and Defense Intelligence Agency Elite Human Intelligence Collector Awards. He is a recognized subject matter expert in human intelligence operations, intelligence support to special operations, counterterrorism, and counterinsurgency, strategic interrogation, resistance to interrogation, and the evolution of violent extremism. Steve currently serves as the chair of the Research Science Advisory Committee for the High Value Detainee Interrogation Group, affectionately known as the HIG. I don't know of anyone who has made a deeper study of the psychology, psychiatry, and consequential effects of coercive interrogation than Steve has. And I think between the two of these folks, we're going to have a really interesting discussion about the hunt for bin Laden, about torture, about how we got to this point, what does work in terms of gathering intelligence information and what doesn't. So with that brief introduction, Wayne, I'm not sure quite how to flip this onto those slides that I want to run through really, really
We can
quickly.
grab that very quickly right here and take it full screen here. Actually, I don't need to do that. Yeah, there we go. Steve and Catherine, can you see what is on our screen?
No.
No? Okay.
I see you.
Okay, well, what David's going to be reading from a couple of portions of the familiar languages, the TCP report, but that's what the audience here will see on the screen.
And how,
Okay.
And you just use this to advance.
thank you.
Okay?
I'm not going to bother to read this introductory statement to the task force report, but it's significant that for the first time in our history, there was a conscious decision made to try to develop useful intelligence information by deliberately inflicting pain and torment on people who are in our custody and control, captives. We changed the language significantly, in my view. We officially, these prisoners were referred to as detainees, and Catherine and Steve can comment about why that language change was significant and why we still refer to them as detainees rather than as prisoners. And I'll just say editorially, from my perspective, the word detainee kind of has a meaning related to being tossed in a city lockup over the weekend for a driving infraction. I've been detained for a temporary period of time. We're dealing with a group of 46 individuals at Guantanamo who are detainees virtually for the rest of their natural lives. They will never be charged, they will never be tried, but they will forever be imprisoned until they die, or until somebody makes up their mind politically to do something with that program that, again, editorially, has been a total and abject failure in dealing with the issue that really affects us, which is how do you ensure the security of the United States of America and its citizens in a world where terrorism is now a tool of various movements that seek to inflict damage on our country.
And David, I want to interject just for a moment on your comment that we made a conscious official decision on this regard. This class, just so you know, the class has been at least acquainted with the background of prosecutions on such things as waterboarding, the 1900 decision, court-martial of Edward Glenn, I think his name was, the conviction of a number of Japanese prisoners for their behavior during World War II, the prosecution, federal prosecution of the sheriff in Texas in '83. They've seen at least snippets of each of those. So we know there's a background of official disapproval that did not get mentioned in the U memorandum.
Okay.
So they know that.
So just to be sure I'm doing this right.
Yeah.
The up button or the down?
Down button.
Okay. I want to just spend a minute talking about 3 unanimous findings of this bipartisan task force on detainee treatment. And the first is that this was an interesting issue for that task force. What do we call this? Do we call it torture? That's a big word. It's a loaded term. It suggests a lot of things that a lot of people were not comfortable with. And finally, after a whole lot of back and forth, the task force unanimously concluded that many of the actions that had taken place to deal with interrogations of prisoners, detainees, constituted torture, and that they violated international law, domestic federal law, and that second, unanimously, we concluded that the nation's most senior officials, through some of their actions and failures to act in the months and years immediately following the September 11, 2001 attacks, bear the ultimate responsibility for contributing to the spread of illegal and improper interrogation. Whoops. And then the third unanimous conclusion, and this is the big one for me, we concluded based on a really comprehensive review of unclassified public records and interviews with about 60 or 75 individuals who had played various roles in the treatment of detainees in American custody. We concluded unanimously that there is no firm or persuasive evidence that the widespread use of harsh interrogation techniques by U.S. forces produced information of significant value. There is substantial evidence that much of the information adduced from the use of enhanced interrogation techniques was not useful or reliable. And finally, we found unanimously that there was no evidence in the public record that torture produced more useful information than conventional methods of interrogation, and this is really significant, or that it saved lives. Over and over and over again, through the years of debating whether this was a useful program or not, one thing that stands out again and again is the claim by proponents that enhanced interrogation, the use of these techniques, saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And therefore, it's justified on that basis, if no other. We could find no evidence in the public record to support that claim. Now, one of the things that Steve and Catherine and I and others have discovered as we talk to groups about torture, enhanced interrogation, a lot of people don't know what we're talking about when we say enhanced interrogation or torture. A lot of people relate that strictly to waterboarding. And people say, well, waterboarding isn't serious. Nobody dies. That's not exactly correct. Waterboarding is not just a psychological device. Medically, it is drowning a person. And if it's not interrupted, the person will die. And I think I don't know.
I'm going to step out for a moment to get a drink of water. I will be right back. Please
okay.
Continue.
Well, don't take too long. We'll be quick. So
Speaking of waterboard, she went to get a glass of water. That was kind of interesting timing.
that is curious timing. So I just wanted to list some various techniques that have been used by U.S. personnel or our hired surrogates to interrogate or punish or torment people who are exclusively and totally within our control. And all of these techniques have been used at one time or another. Usually, they are not used singly. Usually, they have been used simultaneously. Waterboarding goes along with sleep deprivation. It goes along with stress positions. It goes along with any of a number of other things that interrogators or the people who are serving as prison guards decide is appropriate in a particular circumstance to break a prisoner. So I want to go from that to the Senate Special Committee, Select Committee on Intelligence, and the report that it issued in 2014 with regard to CIA torture. That was released in December. This was the most comprehensive examination of interrogation and torture undertaken by the United States that anyone has ever conducted. And that Senate committee had access not just to the public record, but to the classified records of the Central Intelligence Agency and other federal agencies who had dealings with persons under control. And that report also concluded that there had been no significant information, no significant intelligence developed from the use of enhanced interrogation that almost parallels the findings that the Constitution Project's task force reached. So there was a real controversy when that report was issued. because there was a lot of pressure on the Obama administration to declassify that report, or at least portions of it. There was heavy resistance to declassifying anything, even to the publication of the report, by the Central Intelligence Agency. And the president was caught between a rock and a hard place. And the director of the Central Intelligence Agency at that time was John Brennan, who was also caught between a rock and a hard place because he had to serve the President of the United States, and he also had to be sensitive to issues of morale within his own agency. And there were people who felt strongly that they should not be criticized, punished, or singled out for any kind of disciplinary action for their participation in these programs. So a couple of days after the report was issued, Director Brennan held a press conference, and he made some very interesting statements, and I have put these up for you to think about. It's our considered view that the detainees who were subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques provided information that was used or useful in the ultimate operation to go against bin Laden. And that really is the statement that underlies the title of this discussion today. And then he went on to say some CIA officers' actions were not authorized, were abhorrent, and rightly should be repudiated by all. And we fell short in holding some officers accountable for their mistakes. And I want to just add a footnote to this, and I'd invite Steve and Catherine to comment if they feel I'm being unjustified in making this statement. I would say that a more accurate statement of fact would be that no CIA officer's actions were ever the subject of any disciplinary action. And then he concluded, and this is a really interesting statement in my view. Let me be clear, we have not concluded that it was the EITs within that program that allowed us to obtain useful information from the detainees subjected to them. The cause and effect relationship between the use of EITs and useful information subsequently provided by the detainee is, in my opinion, unknowable. Now, we spend as a nation $80 million that was paid to two psychologists who were primarily responsible for developing this program. We spent $80 million getting the program going through these two guys. We have spent countless millions of dollars in its subsequent implementation, defense, and on and on and on. And the most that the CIA director could say in defense of the program was whether this provided any useful information is, in my opinion, unknowable. That's a ringing endorsement if I have ever heard one. So I think that's all that I need to use those slides for, Wayne.
Okay,
And I want to
escape out of that. And we will close it down. And now we can see Steve and Catherine.
Excellent. So, Steve, I want to begin with you. And I'd like to go back to Director Brennan's comments about an unknowable cause and effect between enhanced interrogation and useful information. You have worked with Mitchell and Jessup. You've been in the interrogation rooms with high-value detainees, prisoners. Do you agree with Mr. Brennan's assessment?
Well, let me clarify real quickly, if I may. When I say I worked with Justin, that was back in the day when we were doing resistance to interrogation. I was not involved with their EIT program. In fact, I've been their greatest critic. So to answer your excellent question, it is absolutely knowable. I will be less tactful in my description of the the lack of being frank and forthright about the reality of what this country did. I think Director Brennan, unfortunately, is part of the problem, not part of the solution, and even more so his predecessor, George Tenet, who approved these things. What we do know is this: interrogation, fundamentally, unlike signals intelligence that tries to capture the electromagnetic spectrum and draw meaning out of it, from phone calls to faxes to digital communications of all types, and imagery captures through both literally photographic and digital means these images of places and people that could provide us intelligence. Human intelligence writ large, and interrogation specifically, is predicated on our ability to accurately, reliably, and comprehensively leverage the information that's contained in the human memory. And one need only spend 5 minutes on the internet looking at a few of the research papers to show human memory is extremely fallible. I mean, you folks are students. If your memory were infallible, you'd all be A students, this would be easy, you'd be ready to move on, but it's not. Part of the research that we've done related to interrogation has focused specifically on not just how to avoid corrupting memory, but then also how to enhance it. And those methods for enhancing and those methods for avoiding the corruption of memory are the antithesis, the absolute antithesis of every step of the way of an enhanced interrogation program, the so-called enhanced. I really bristle at that term because enhanced, of course, suggests maybe better, new and improved, when it's everything but that. So, and I warned Dave ahead of time. I get a little bit passionate about this topic. I have a lot of thoughts about it. I don't pull punches. I try to be respectful to the individuals, but I'm going to try to catch myself before going on and let Catherine answer this question.
Catherine, would you like to take a shot at that?
Okay, so I'd say with respect to what Director Brennan said, it's instructive to compare that statement with the statements the CIA was making about the effectiveness of the program while it was going on, and particularly the statements to the Justice Department when they were seeking to get the program reauthorized. So there was a period in where the Justice Department had withdrawn the original John U. torture memos and was looking to replace them. And particularly around that time, the CIA relied very heavily on claims that this attack and that attack and the other attack were prevented by intelligence gain that would not have been gained except through the use of the CIA's techniques. And so when we were looking at the issue of effectiveness for the Constitution Project Task Force, we didn't have access to any of the information that the Senate had. What we did have was the public claims that were made over and over about this is one attack that was prevented through the use of enhanced interrogation, and then the similar claims got made about bin Laden's capture, bin Laden's death from the week or so after it happened. And, we didn't have access to nearly as much information as the Senate had, but we did reach a remarkably similar conclusion about that issue specifically, just based on public information. And so, the justification for the program, not only in popular culture, but also legally, was that it was supposed to gain actionable, unique, life-saving intelligence. And there is just no evidence at all of that. And so the CIA's response to the report somewhat concedes that point, which is useful as far as it goes, and then sort of tries to change the question and focus on other issues, and then saying, well, the detainees give us some valuable information. That wasn't the defense at the time.
That's a good point.
I want to ask you, Catherine, to enlighten us a little bit, if you would, about your reactions to Zero Dark 30 and your insights into some of the representations and conclusions from that film.
Well, I have a confession. I haven't seen the film. I've watched clips, I've heard descriptions. I mean, from what I know of it, it's my single biggest problem with the film is I believe there's some sort of statement before it begins in the credits that, this is all a true story. And it's not, it's a work of fiction. It's a work of fiction that drew heavily on information from the CIA and, took liberties. They made composite characters. The scene that was showed here shows the analyst watching videos of interrogations. Those videos were all destroyed by the CIA, and then they stopped recording it. So it was a work of fiction, and I don't think. And so I feel like as a film critic, as a film critic, not having seen the thing, I can't really fairly critique it, but I can say that it's irresponsible to claim it's purely a true story when it is an edited, composited version of the agency's view of the story.
So let me take that one step further and ask what to me is the crucial question here. Did torture reveal a trail that ultimately led to the attack on the bin Laden compound in Pakistan?
So, one of the things that struck me as so odd about this debate, specifically with regard to bin Laden, is he was killed in 2011. The last interrogation that I think the Senate report mentions as leading to intelligence about Ahmed al-Kuwaiti of a CIA detainee is sometime like 2004, 2005. So, regardless of the back and forth about which session of questioning by which person, and, clearly it wasn't what lawyers call the proximate cause of the raid by a long shot. And then I think that when you get into the specifics of the Senate report, I find their chronology more convincing than the CIA's. But also, I mean, the week or so after bin Laden was killed, there was an op-ed published in the Wall Street Journal by the former Attorney General of the United States, Michael Mukasey, who said, it was called The Waterboarding Trail to bin Laden, and it said that after being waterboarded, KSM broke like a dam and revealed all sorts of information, including the courier. So when we looked at this for the task force report, this is long before the Senate report came out. I guess I can't remember exactly where Zero Dark 30 fit in chronologically, but other people who were involved in the CIA program, the former CIA director Michael Hayden, Jose Rodriguez, said that actually Khalid Sheikh Mohammed denied knowing who Ahmed al-Kuwaiti was, and his denial was useful because they could tell he was lying. And so it seems like this was the sort of highest profile, most cinematic success of the campaign against Al-Qaeda, so it was sort of seized on as a moment to rehash the interrogation debate and to defend the program. I think that overall, there's all sorts of evidence of the harm that the program did, and for instance, one of the attacks that was most often cited as one prevented by the program was a plot to fly airplanes into the, I think it's called the US Bank Tower or the Library Tower. It's a skyscraper in Los Angeles.
This is the tall buildings plot?
maybe. I think of it as the library tower plot. That's what it was called for a while. I do not remember exactly what the Senate report refers to it as, and I do not actually have a photographic memory. Anyway, this was a plot that was actually thwarted in 2000. I think that one of the pilots pulled out in 2002. One of the leader of the terrorist cell was captured by Malaysian intelligence some years before, and there are all sorts of basic chronological problems with the CIA's account of how torture saved lives. And I think just looking to the chronology is one of the better ways to make sense of it without getting bogged down in every single detail of the interrogation. Very often there's a fundamental chronological error in especially in the claims that the torture memos make about its effectiveness. In the case of the Bin Laden raid, the key chronological thing is just this gap of 7 years. And so I think that's the most relevant issue for me.
Steve, I'm going to get to you in just a minute, but I want to go back to a comment that Catherine made. My memory of the tall buildings plot, or the library plot, whichever it may be, was that the pilot who pulled out of the conspiracy did so in the Philippines, and did so voluntarily, and basically spilled the beans on everything before anybody had ever been interrogated by the CIA.
True.
Is that a correct memory? Steve, why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, they got information about Operation Bojinka, which is ultimately going to be a multi-craft, like a Pacific version of 9/11, if you will, and that was all obtained through source debriefings, what I would call intelligence interviews, as opposed to any sort of course of interrogation. Yeah, it's, oops.
Sorry, Steve, I was just mentioning something to Dave that I want to follow up on, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay. Would you mind if I roll back the video just a moment to 0 Dark 30?
Sure, yeah, we can do that.
So for those attending today, I will, I'm going to rock your world here. A little background from, yeah. I'm a career military intelligence officer. I'm the son of a career military officer. Service was deep.
All I want to do is separate them from the people like you. A guy called Abu Ahmed from Kuwait.
Yes, I remember him. A nice guy.
How close was he? What was his relationship to the leadership?
I don't know.
Did you guys?
Lance, look at this.
I don't know, sir. I have no idea about him.
That's something you don't need an idea about.
You can't see that, I don't think, but you can hear it, right?
When you met Khalid Sheikh Mohammed,
I can hear it.
was this one of the facilities?
Share the screen.
Is this Abu Ahmed?
It's the share screen button.
KSN, your boss. Mukhtar, Tato, you say potato, I say coffee, KSN, you say Mukhtar, okay? After Mukhtar was captured, what did Abu Ahmed do? Don't let that be. I think he went to work for the Sheikh. What do you know about that?
Okay? Does that serve the purpose? Okay, Steve, back to you.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Wait a minute, we couldn't hear you for a moment. Hold on. Okay, try again. I think you need to do something at your end, Steve, with your
Yeah.
microphone, maybe?
Over.
If you
There you go.
Nope.
No?
I
You're
think-
still not. Am I doing something wrong here?
If you're asking me, you're asking the wrong
Well, we've
person.
got a lot
Try
of,
it-
we've got
try
a lot of
hitting the
young people that know how to do
microphone
this stuff works.
do you see two buttons to the left of the share screen?
Yeah.
Try that.
Well, that's gonna mute our microphone. We need his coming in. Let's see. I can't see any reason why we're silenced here. Okay, let's take that away. Oh, I bet I know where we go here. No, that's okay, let me find Lance.
His number's on the board behind you.
Yeah. Just a second, Steve. Catherine, can we hear you? Catherine, if you'll. Okay, seems to be something wrong on our end. Just a moment, we'll try to get this fixed.
Share the screen.
Anybody want to come play with the controls, please make yourself.
So that's something when he shared it.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe I did something when I shared the screen that we needed to. Hi, Lance, it's Wayne. We seem to have lost the sound from the other two participants, and I can't figure out what I did. We went to look at the video clip again. What did I do wrong in that process? Okay, thanks. Okay, Lance is coming back to get this fixed for us. Sorry about this. I tried at the beginning of the semester, I had another class that was taking place at the same time as a football game here on campus. So I tried to do, you got it, I was just gonna explain, Steve, that I tried to do my class by remote video. And I was sitting in my office where the entire system went down. I don't know if I broke it or if the football team broke it. For some reason, we can't do that. What did I do?
Let's take a look.
You just close. Yeah.
So you just want to fix it?
I
Just.
wanted to take a picture drawing. Yeah.
All right, guys, can we hear you now?
1, 2, 3.
Okay, the usual answer, turn it off and turn it back on again. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Steve, I think we interrupted you.
Professor McCormick, may I invite you to sit down now, please?
Thank you.
You comfortable in the back of the room? Let's see, I don't know where I got cut off, because I had this dramatic introduction that was
We watched the film.
offset. The point I'm going to make is, how to put this? The CIA's involvement in that film is well known, and they are an incredibly secretive agency. Just ask my friend Ollie Safon, who got at least a third of his book redacted. They decline. It's the only thing, but yet you look at Jim Mitchell's book, you look at Jose Rodriguez's book, you look at all these other ones, nary a single redaction because it purports the wonders and the absolute requirement of the EITs. If you criticize it, they will redact you into submission. It's called propaganda, it's called control. And this is, again, coming from a second generation military officer. I say enough is enough. I've been to 5 different wars, allegedly, to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I was looking foreign, when the problems, the challenge we face today are domestic. And I think the fact that this country got involved in torture is symptomatic of that, and how we systematically did that. Catherine and General Irvine in that task force study was just phenomenal. But I wonder how many people read that as opposed to watch Zero Dark 30. Yeah, again.
Not many.
Yeah, no, and it's unfair, because this is a key policy question that Americans need to answer. Is torture ever allowed? Is it consistent with our national interests and the values that we claim to hold dear and cherish? I say that it's not. And the constant cherry picking on the part of the U.S. government and the part of the CIA specifically. Vice President Cheney, I think, was the champion of this when he said that he tried to correlate, which there was a correlation between the fact that once the EIT started, there was never another major attack on the U.S. homeland. But you know what? I never visited the state of Wyoming during that period, so I think that also could have contributed to it. Or the fact that I changed my socks on a regular basis. It has the same evidentiary support. Is that silly notion? He conflates the idea of correlation of two things happening at the same time with causation. And there's no evidence. There's no one cannot make either an argument based on reality, on history, on the psychology or neuroscience, on operational realities, on national security theory policy, to say that the EITs were of any value when in fact, of course, you walk away from a very emotional experience with Zero Dark 30. And I regret to say that I watched it only after many months of hesitation, but I thought questions like this would come up and I wanted to be able to address it. But it's so silly. It's the same way interrogation is presented on TV shows and movies. So, and that, by the way, I'll try to make this point very quickly. That is probably the most vexing element of this whole debate. Let me ask you, I'm going to pose a question to the audience. We're aware of the fact, you're aware of the fact that North Korean nuclear weapons capability has advanced much more rapidly than our government alleges to understand. So a question for you, do you think the problem up till now has been the telemetry system, or do you think it's been propulsion when they try to transfer from the Nodong 2 basic throwaway to something that would be able to reach intercontinental distances to a circular probability of error that would be relevant? Your thoughts?
Anybody want to try that one?
I do not.
Okay, now, and don't be offended when I follow up with this. That level, your perceived, your claimed, your understandable level of professional ignorance, I don't mean it pejorative, I mean you don't know about those things. I studied those things. It's the same level the average person knows about interrogation. Literally. I mean, people operate on the fact that they watched those movies back in the day, or the movie Taken. And
24.
I get it. I understand interrogation. They don't. And the sad part, the worst part is policymakers, and I've had a chance to testify for Congress 5 times. I've sat in senators and members of the House in their offices. I've been at the National Security Council. I've met with very senior intelligence officers, and I'm just amazed at not only the level of ignorance, but it's called the, escaped me. Anyway, there's actually a confirmation bias. There's a concept in psychology, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Look that up. Dunning-Kruger. It means your level, your depth of ignorance is so incredible that not only do you not know the subject, but you know so little, you don't even know how little you know about it. And therefore you can't make any judgments. And it happens over and over again. I mean, again, the average citizen has a right to not know anything about interrogation. They have other things that are far more important. Policymakers who have a role in this, certainly senior intelligence officers, who in the room with Director Tennant ever asked these very simple questions of Drs. Mitchell and Jessen? Okay, this is a really interesting presentation, gentlemen. Just a few follow-up questions. Can you tell me about your direct interrogation experience? Well, we have none. We've only worked in a training environment simulating communist interrogators. Okay, well, tell me about your Middle East experience. We have none. Oh, okay. Tell me about your knowledge of the literature that really addresses how information is exchanged between two people in an interview or interrogation. Never really looked at it. So wait a second. So you don't have any experience in interrogation. You don't know anything about the Middle East. Oh, you've worked in intelligence context. Well, no, never that either. So we're going to pay you $181 million to interrogate Middle Eastern, the people from the Middle East primarily, in intelligence environment. You have no experience, right? Hey, this sounds great. What could possibly go wrong? And there wasn't a single senior official representing us in that room to say, stop. This makes no sense whatsoever. When they say no, and they do this, you need to recall the zeitgeist. At the times we were fearful of another attack. We were afraid. We wanted revenge. Well, you know what? Again, citizens of America have every right to be fearful and want revenge. But as a professional intelligence officer, General Irvine will back me up on this, we're not paid to have an emotion or an ego. We're paid to use the best training based on the best science to be most effective in getting the information that can shape policy and the national security level and in the military context. We don't have an excuse to say, well, I beat this guy up because I was angry. Or, I mean, look at firefighters. You watch a firefighter. They do not race into a building. They walk thoughtfully, they make an assessment, and they act. And sometimes they walk away when they know it's a lost cause. That's what interrogators need to do. But instead, we always had an excuse. And forgive me, I'm on a roll here, but I'm going to add one more thing to this. So if we can justify torture because these people deserved it, or we had to do anything, then what if an F-16 pilot, some Air Force captain says, you know, Chief, this crew chief, I know where we keep those biological weapons. Why don't you put a couple of those bombs right in my wing stores? And because the bunker busting bombs, the kinetic energy based bombs are not working in Tora Bora. But I will tell you, I can tell you from professional experience, having studied this too, biological chemical weapons would have wiped out bin Laden and all his henchmen. They could not escape that in those caves. They would have found them and they would have died a horrible death. But would that make it justified? Would that have justified it? And no, it would not. And I submit that torture is the biological and chemical warfare equivalent of human intelligence. And we need to treat it the same way. Would it be effective with a near-term end state? Yes. Would it have strategic consequences lasting generations that would hurt this country? An equal impact, more emphatic, yes.
Steve, I want to ask you to keep that roll going for just a bit and talk a little bit about your view of the fundamental flaw behind coercive interrogation.
You can make a number of arguments. Yes, first and foremost, I began talking about memory. And every element of the enhanced interrogation program can be demonstrated to, and has been demonstrated through research, not in, as torture, but just the idea of sleep deprivation. What's the effect of sleep deprivation on memory? What's the effect of anxiety-producing circumstances such as modifying or undermining somebody's circadian rhythms? What's the impact of anxiety produced by personal threats, physical harm, and physical injury? All those things, under other circumstances, have been studied to show that it literally destroys memory. And people, they'll say things that they thought happened, but it turns out it didn't. And the fundamental goal, again, is trying to effectively leverage what somebody possesses. Now, the other thing, there is a very clear set psychological literature that talks about in-group, out-group boundaries. We form them very quickly. This class, you got to have that shared goal of getting through this course, getting through law school. But if your professor said, you know what, okay, we're going to break up in two groups. You have the arrow team and you have the bow team, and now there's this competition. There's competition, and only one of those groups can get A's. Everybody else is going to get B's or C's. The competition grows, and suddenly you see each other very, very differently. You resist the desire, the interest in helping another person. And what happens when you humiliate somebody? Like the Army Field Manual has an approach called Pride and Ego Down, which is essentially humiliation. It tightens, it strengthens, it highlights the in-group, out-group. So as the interrogator using these tactics, I was not only the ugly American, now I'm the on steroids, that version. And it also strengthens the bonds of people in the in-group. They feel more allegiance to, they feel more responsibility towards their group. And their group could be Al-Qaeda, it could be a terrorist group, it could be a tribe, it could be whatever community. But the desire to thwart me in getting what I want is coupled with their desire to further the aims of their community, which is to keep information. So it really, if you want to look up counterproductive, I wouldn't be surprised someday you look up counterproductive and it'll give you examples, say, CEITs, see the Enhanced Interrogation Program, because it's a textbook example on multiple levels.
Catherine, I want to turn to you for just a minute, because one of the principal justifications for the CIA program was that the approved techniques of enhanced interrogating were said to produce no serious medical consequences, or I should say, and no lasting psychological or psychiatric damage. You've investigated those claims. In some depth.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to ask you, how could the CIA make those two arguments?
Yeah, those, even more than the claims about those techniques saving lives, I frankly still don't know how the precise, I mean, they do, of course, cause lasting harm. Virtually every CIA to go through the interrogation, every detainee to go through the CIA interrogation program has suffered lasting harm. So the character in Zero Dark 30 is called Amar, who's sort of a composite character, but there is a CIA former high-value detainee who's being tried before the Guantanamo Military Commission, named Amar al-Baluchi. And a clip from Zero Dark 30 was actually aired in the Military Commission hearings in one of the more bizarre days in a bizarre system. And his attorneys were arguing that the filmmakers had gotten information about their case that they did not have access to until either the Senate report came out or to this day, although they have top secret security clearances. So the power to sort of classify your own worst actions is pretty great for propaganda purposes. On the medical effects, I mean, one of the parts of the CIA program that we still know relatively little about is the involvement of medical professionals besides just Mitchell and Judson, who were sort of the authors of the program. The CIA has an office called the Office of Medical Services. And they were supposed to be acting as what doctors sometimes refer to as a safety officer, making sure that people didn't get tortured too badly, people didn't die, people didn't get paralyzed, and under medical ethics, you are not supposed to do that at all, even if it's just a gross violation to tell someone, okay, cause this much pain, that's okay, now stop. In that case, you're directly implicated in harming someone who's supposed to be your patient. And so I guess doctors who were this complicit were also not inclined to see the harm of what they were doing. But we don't know the exact process by which these claims that, oh, well, we've watched all these people carefully and no one has shown any harm. I don't know how the CIA made those claims, but they are pretty clearly, multiple cases of brain injury, of all sorts of psychological harm, and then very straightforward physical injuries like people having scars on their wrists and ankles. So I think in general, once you can't authorize a little bit of carefully controlled torture, it corrupts the intelligence you gain, corrupts your intelligence service.
Steve, you want to comment on that?
Please, thank you. Catherine raised a couple of really important points that are central to this argument about torture. There's always this part about, well, there's pain and there's severe pain. You know, they're pain specialists, physicians who do nothing but deal with that. And that's probably, again, the most challenging element. If somebody comes in and says, oh, I have awful pain in my lower back, there's no way other than somebody's self-report that something severe versus mild. And, think about this, though. The fundamental premise of torture is I'm going to make you so physically, emotionally, or psychologically, and I'll be kind here, uncomfortable that it's no longer tolerable, and that answering questions that you came in here absolutely unwilling to share, you're going to do that to make it stop. Think back to the awful 60 Minutes interview of Jose Rodriguez. He said at one point that these were the worst of the worst. They were willing to die for the cause. They weren't just going to answer questions. We had to introduce a level of stress to cause them to change. So again, they were so committed to their cause. It wasn't going to be a pinprick. It wasn't going to be a pinch. It wasn't going to be something from the Three Stooges. It was going to be something severe enough. That's his point. Later on in the discussion, he says, wait a second, really the stress was no more, or the pain was no more that people experience when they go to the gym. So what you're telling me actually then is these people weren't committed to their cause. They weren't really resistant because people go to the gym all the time, which leads to something else, the water board. Those who say that it's not, I think General Irvine, he put it in the proper context from the beginning. One of our colleagues, Malcolm Nance, retired Master Chief of the Navy, he ran the Navy's survival school, and it was the last of the services survival school that used the waterboard. So he knows it better than anybody else in the world. We testified together, and he made a very strong statement. He said, waterboarding is not simulated drowning, it is drowning. So the question, and they keep saying, well, we use this routinely in survival school. No, we don't. And I don't know why people in the government don't stand up and say we don't. The Marines no longer do it. The Army no longer uses it. The Air Force no longer uses it. And I think the Navy has phased it out as well. Why? Because with resistance to interrogation, again, I served as the Pentagon Senior Intelligence Officer for what we call Special Survival Training, which was specifically this, training people who are going to be potentially taken hostage, captured by a terrorist group, or in a peacetime governmental detention with a country that does not observe the Geneva Convention protocols. So the point of it is we stopped doing this because it teaches people to fail. We teach people, it's stress inoculation, it's the idea that you can recognize what's coming and we give them strategies for dealing with it, but you don't want them to fail because the psychologists involved suggest that the more often they fail, the more comfortable they are failing in the future. You want to give them in fact, we would take them right to the edge of capitulation. And then if they weren't going to pull back on their own, we would do something in the scenario to pull them back. My good friend Jerry Ogrissick, a clinical psychologist and certified SEER psychologist, he was asked about this, and he made it very clear. People fail. There's nobody who sits there and goes for 20 minutes. And waterboarding in SEER schools, survival schools, was more like this. 1 or 2 people out of a class of 30 would be exposed to it. Everybody else watch. And it would be, they knew, by the way, I'm in the hands of my colleagues. They will not let me get hurt. I'm going home tonight. I'm not in the hands of the enemy. So even taking away all those contextual stresses, they would quit. I mean, they would put their hand up within seconds. I can't do this anymore. So if people think that, and I'll make this last point, Doctors Mitchell never were involved with using waterboarding in SEER. It was never used at the Air Force schools when they were there, or at the joint schools when they were there. They went down to the Navy school, because Malcolm Nance told me this directly, and watched from outside, watched a couple waterboarding sessions, asked for the manual, the training manual, and departed. And that was the expertise. That was part of their portfolio of talent for which they wanted to charge the government $181 million.
This is Mitchell and Jessen.
Mitchell and Jessen, thank you, yes. I don't want to make the point here. I mean, you saw Catherine's credentials and you know General Irvine's credentials. I don't make any claim to being exceptionally bright on any subject. But this is so clear to me. I just don't understand. I don't understand why people accept such flimsy arguments and lack of support and poor logic to make a case for, other than it's just purely emotion driven by watching a movie like Zero Dark 30. And that's where Zero Dark 30 should be in the pantheon of great propaganda films that undermine national security. Now you're going to watch it, right?
I'm going to take a few minutes and turn to you who are here in the class today and invite you to pose a question or two to Steve and Catherine, because I think you will agree they know what they're talking about. So, who's got one? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. So I'm curious. I mean, it's kind of a simple question, but and it has two parts. The first is, why, in your opinion, did we see a rise of the EIT alongside the Iraq War and after 9/11? And if not through EIT, how was important intelligence gathered that led us to bin Laden?
Steve, do you want to take a look at that?
Could you repeat it for me? Because with the acoustics, it's hard for me to make that out.
It may be a little difficult to hear. The question was,
you want me to-
Dave says, come on up.
Come on up.
Okay.
Maybe that's better. That way you can see her.
Come on down.
There you go.
Our first contestant.
Am I in the screen? No. Oh, it's
Oh.
okay. But you can just hear me better here. Okay.
Speak up.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So, thank you for your presentations thus far. Very interesting. My first question is, in your opinion, why did we see the rise of EIT after 9/11 and in the Iraq War? And then, if not gathered through EIT, how did we get intelligence leading us to Osama bin Laden?
Okay, good questions. Number one, I'm glad I'm doing this from afar so General Irvine doesn't smack me up the head, because this is an overlooked part. The interrogation doctrine that was used in the United States military is completely dysfunctional. The Army Field Manual has no science, no reflection built into it at all. It's a simple-minded approach that completely fails to employ even 1950s behavioral science, let alone 2017 behavioral science.
You know, I just have to point out, Steve, that when a lot of us get together as military officers, we invite the Army, the Navy. We're not sure we consider the Air Force quite on the same level. So I just like everyone to take that in the appropriate context as you're trashing my
Does
service.
that mean they fly higher?
He is flying really high.
You know,
Are people familiar with the Army Field Manual? Are the students familiar with it?
You mentioned it is all.
I think in very rough, broad terms.
They've seen the reference in the Detainee Treatment Act, the 2005 statute.
Fundamentally speaking, it's a doctrine for interrogation that was designed specifically for a Cold War battle against the Soviet Red Army coming through the Fulda Gap, where you have very, very junior enlisted interrogators interrogating very, very junior Russian or Warsaw Pact captives. And for that, it was probably useful because most of those people had no resistance. In fact, none of them would have resistance training, and they'd be scared to death. And plus, they knew very little. I mean, they were privates and sergeants at a very low level. And then secondly, you have to have I'm going to defend the Army now. It's a big service with lots of people. During the height of the Iraq-Afghanistan wars, we were training 1,800 young, essentially 18, 19, 20-year-olds to be interrogators. You cannot afford for any of those people to fail. And so you ask yourself, are we going to give them a sophisticated set of strategies that are useful in the world, or are we going to teach them something that we can teach them? And we chose the latter. We literally chose the latter without any reflection, without any standard. So the fact that there wasn't a model out there other than what criminal investigators were using, there wasn't a model that was useful. Commanders at all levels saying, wait a second, we need more. And in the special operations community, where I worked for a long time, you had a lot of people who remembered, when I went up to that survival course, and they were yelling at me and throwing me against the wall and sleep depriving me and all these other things, I remember feeling like I wanted to tell them some things. So without any training in that, they would start to use it. And then they thought, well, let's get the pros from Dover. And insidiously, they got these SEER instructors to come out and start to use this. Now, again, this is, talk about connecting the dots. What are the SEER techniques? The SEER techniques are simulations of the basic methods used by the North Koreans, the Soviets, the Chinese, in various wars for two purposes: propaganda and to get false confessions. And they were very useful for that. Now, think about the information spectrum. If you have truth, reliable information on one end, where are you going to put false confessions and propaganda? Literally on the far end. So again, lack of logic. If the system is designed specifically to get false confessions and propaganda, why would you suddenly think when we do it, oh, and by the way, the official doctrine of the United States government taught to everybody who goes through that, each of these constitutes torture, it's unlawful, and it's immoral. We teach that over and over again, except for when the U.S. does it, apparently. It changes. So that was the rise of EITs. So I think the second part, how do we actually get information? We got it very well. There were pockets of excellence, people who are using much more sophisticated means, who are thwarted at every possible juncture, because no, you need to get on board. You had the General Millers of the world who were trying to take this awful doctrine from Guantanamo and like a virus spreading throughout the world, took it to Iraq and then ultimately Afghanistan. And here's the other thing too: intelligence drives wars. Operations folks think they drive it. Intelligence drives wars. So if there's success, intelligence should raise their hand, or they should do one of these. But how long have we been in Afghanistan? And look at the situation in Iraq. Anything close to a win is still far off in the future and probably never to be realized. Which makes that then in turn, if we're going to take credit for a win, we have to take credit for failure. The intelligence failures are at a monumental, just in its effects. Now, could we do it better? You have the Mark Fallons, the Robert McFadden's, the Ali Safans, the Charlie Minks, the Eric. These people were skilled in what they did, but they did just the antithesis. Their approaches were thoughtful, they're sophisticated, they're culturally sensitive or applicable. They were patient, and they recognized the true challenge of interrogation. They had a sophisticated understanding of the task before them. It is not easy to elicit information from somebody who's absolutely committed to not giving you that information. And I'll end it with this. Here's the ugly secret. Actually, it's a beautiful secret, Daphne, of interrogation. But you won't hear it from most people, but you'll hear it from me, and you'll hear it from people I think are the best interrogators I've ever encountered. You cannot always get useful information from everybody. There are going to be some people that you're never going to get useful information. Again, that's called, we do bombing runs. We spend billions of dollars on weapon systems, and they don't always work properly. And nobody ever says, okay, we're going to quit doing strategic daylight bombing, and we're going to quit sending the infantry into an urban environment because we failed there. No, it's, okay, learn from your mistakes and move on, try to refine your tactics. But there's policymakers all down to the junior interrogator based on pressure. I need to get this information from this person. within this period of time. And that leads to all sorts of awful things.
I want to jump in
I'll step up.
with a quick observation, because all of you, and thank you for sharing your question.
Thank you for the question.
All of you saw the clip that Professor McCormick played from, was it Frontline, the interview with Jane Mayer, and a really interesting guy, Jack Clunan. Clunan was an FBI investigator and a crack interrogator. He shows up in a number of books on 9/11 and the aftermath, and he had a very interesting set of experiences, and I don't know where that feedback's coming from.
I don't know either.
I think it's coming from their end.
There was a guy who wanted to retire from Al Qaeda, and he had been bin Laden's comptroller. These folks can correct me if I misstate this, but he shopped himself around, and he wasn't happy with literally the retirement program that bin Laden had, which was kind of a real retirement program. And so he ended up in FBI custody. The FBI put him into the witness protection program, and Clunan was one of his minders. And the story of this fellow is absolutely unbelievable, and in some ways it's hilarious. He was a character. He kept wanting the FBI to fix him up with women, which they were not permitted to do under the terms of their protocols and so forth. And finally, they decided, well, gosh, the only way that we're ever going to get this guy to calm down is we're going to snatch his wife, his family, and bring them over here, which they did. His wife had never had a decent medical examination in her life. The Bureau arranged for her to have a thorough medical exam, and it turned up some polyps in her colon, and she was operated on. The condition was treated, and she recovered well. And she told her husband, I don't care what they ask you, you tell them the truth. And Clunan and his colleagues developed a wealth of information because they treated this guy decently. And I think the point that has been made over and over and over again is that, and I guess the best expression of this I feel is from another FBI agent, and Catherine and Steve both are acquainted with, now his name, Joe Navarro. Joe was a senior investigator, interrogator for the Bureau for years and years and years. He would say, if he were here, I need three things as an interrogator. I need a quiet room. I need to know what the rules are because I don't want to get into trouble. And I need enough time to make the individual I'm talking to become, to that individual, his best and his only friend. And if you give me those three conditions, I will get whatever he or she has that is gettable. And I can do it every time. He said, I can't tell you how many guys I have sent to a federal penitentiary for long, long sentences, and I get Christmas cards from them every year because I was their best and only friend. And I think the conventional approach to interrogation has a long history of success. And why we decided in a moment of panic to abandon it, I still have never figured out. Catherine, do you want to weigh in?
So just going back to the SEER program, one thing that Colonel Kleinman told me when I interviewed him he was one of the people I interviewed for the Constitution Project Task Force, and you guys some other time should ask him about his trip to Iraq because it was fascinating. But he talked about during SEER training, the trainees are given certain pieces of information that they are told are the pieces of information that their interrogators want and that they are supposed to resist revealing. And sometimes they reveal them. And on that basis, some of the people familiar with the program thought, well, look, it works great. But of course, coercion leading to people telling what interrogators what they want to hear is sort of an acknowledged phenomenon. And so giving people the specific pieces of information that the interrogators want to hear sort of distorts the whole experience. And even in the context of police interrogations in the United States, with Miranda rights and everything, false confessions are surprisingly common. And if you throw that into the mix, I think it's very important to consider the effects of false confessions while you're evaluating interrogation and what works and what doesn't.
And the Central Park 5 case is a really good example of that.
Yes.
Which case, I'm sorry?
The Central Park 5.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
The Central Park 5 case is a really good example of the problem of false confessions.
Yeah. And the case I first learned about September 11th that sort of got me interested in this whole subject was this Canadian citizen who we sent to Syria. And it was basically because of false confessions that other Canadians had made under torture in Syria. So it really, it corrupts not only, it corrupts the information in the system, and then if that information is used to kill and capture other people, it really just has awful consequences.
Yeah.
We're approaching the end of
We've got about 10 minutes.
the session, and so I want to ask someone else if you'd like to ask a question that these folks can deal with in about 3 minutes.
Sure.
This is for it.
No, wait, we probably can't deal with any question in 3
Well,
minutes.
because I've got a final wrap-up that's going to take a little bit longer.
Hi, again, thanks for sharing this with us. It's been really informative. My question goes back to one of the flaws that we talked about with EITs, and that's the fallibility of somebody's memory. If these officers were aware of the effects that EITs had on a person's memory and how they kind of work contrary to enhancing somebody's memory, why would they continue to do that instead of work on techniques to try to enhance the memory better?
Well, my quick question is, I have presented to no end of groups, including interrogators at Fort Huachuca in the Army, to the FBI. And when I bring up the issue of memory, people, they do one of those, I never thought of that. Seriously, it's like this radical idea. I should have copyrighted it or something. Don't you start with the beginning? Remember Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind, and the end is where the information lies, in memory. So everything needs to work backwards. So the other part is there's a dichotomy. They think when somebody doesn't recall, they're lying or resisting. They never think for the fact that, I'm sorry, what was your first name?
Michelle.
So I'm talking to you, and I want you to tell me about, do you remember all the classes you took a year ago? Each of those?
Kind of.
You remember the name of all the
Yes.
Okay, do you remember the name of all the people that were in each of your classes?
No.
What? Okay, come on now. We know that you would know that. All right, send her to the, come on. We ask questions like that. Remember, you were with Bin Laden 3.5 years ago. Who was there? What did they talk about? What order? What was the plans? And when they get the point, no, I'm at the end of the ability of human memory to recall events. No, you're just lying. But yet, interrogators, here's the dichotomy. Interrogators, their coffee break. I couldn't find my keys the other day. Yeah, I know, me too. My memory's going. Oops, sorry, back to work. Now, 5 years ago, you were like, it's not that, this is not, as they say, rocket science.
I'll add one other observation to that. I think one of the reasons that the CIA didn't ask the right questions is because prior to September 11th, 2001, interrogation was never a core competency the CIA had. The only strategic interrogators with experience were with primarily the FBI. And of course, if it was invented by the Federal Bureau of Investigation from the CIA perspective, it could not possibly be of any value, just as the Army Field Manual is of no value to certain individuals who came through the Air Force. But having said that, I want to wrap up with this question for both of our guests. We had the Constitution Project report in 2010. We had the SISI report in 2014. In 2016, we have President Donald Trump. And so what happens next? Do we have to fight this fight all over again? And Catherine, I'll invite you to take the first turn at responding to that. What happens now based on all of the empirical data that we have accumulated and an administration that evidently is not particularly interested in real facts?
So, for this subject area, I'm actually surprised we're not worse off. And it's been striking to have Michael Hayden, the former director of the CIA, and really one of the most vociferous defenders of the EIT program, although it was largely over by the time he took over, has spoken very forcefully that and said things like, if Donald Trump wants the CIA to waterboard, he'd better bring his own bucket. CIA institutionally seems to have decided that, I don't know if they put it this way, they seem earnestly convinced that it wasn't worth it. And to that I credit a little bit the Constitution Project report, much more so the Senate report and the legislation that followed from it. That said, the problem we never really fixed is that the United States increasingly relies on foreign proxies with its capture and interrogation operations, and there are reports of that increasing, and the new CIA director has, made a speech talking about how we need to be vicious. So I'm especially concerned about the United States simply not acknowledging responsibility for what happens with captives, or either deliberately avoiding seeing torture, or in worst cases, actively encouraging it.
Steve?
Yeah, I first started encountering this problem in the late 80s. I got my commission in 1985. I used to train people in interrogation, and then often we go to South Korea for these very intensive field exercises. Routinely, I would have to stop torture. In a field exercise, for instance, I'll give you a graphic example. I walked in on a young soldier who had another American shackled at the wrists and ankles, had his pants down, was threatening to sodomize him if he didn't answer the questions. And every time I ask people, why are you doing this? We didn't teach you this. It's the same answer over and over again. It's the only thing that works in their small world. It's the only thing that, quote, these people understand and so forth. So this is what I'm going to present, and I haven't presented this way before, but I think it captures it. And maybe this isn't a good reference in Utah, but my understanding of how you treat alcoholism or addictions of any type is, well, we'll go with alcoholism. They never say, okay, let's get to the point where we can have a glass of wine with dinner. No, it's complete and total abstinence forever and ever, amen. You don't even go down that road for a second because you don't know what's going to come from there. It's called the insanity, they call it. Every time you go out, you get drunk and bad things happen, but tonight will be different somehow. I think that's ultimately, I don't have any confidence that we could put a law in place or doctrine in place or any legal structure, and this is relevant obviously to you folks as law students, that's going to guarantee us, or at least would make a person like me confident that it will never happen again. I think we need to deal with it in an absolute total abstinence under any circumstance. Going forward, from this day forward, anybody involved is punished severely. I mean, sanctions, they lose their jobs. They are never allowed to work for the U.S. government, like the current lawyer for the Department of Transportation, Stephen Hadley. You know, it's impunity. And people, they don't look at the rule. They look at, did anybody get punished? Dave Becker at the Defense Intelligence Agency, responsible for the horrendous treatment of Al-Qatani, the prisoner 063. You can look that up. Newsweek had a great expose. And now he's been promoted into the senior executive service, for God's sake. So I'm going to end with this, and I promise this is not a commercial endorsement, but one of my brothers, Mark Fallon, I'm going to put this up here. Mark Fallon was a CIS agent, and he took the courageous act of, he's not writing this, it's not a tell-all, look at me, how wonderful I is. Just the opposite. He had such a unique perspective on how all this came out, and he ultimately gets to the same conclusion that I have, and this is sad, but it's real. There are a lot of people in America, a lot of people that even you, not a lot, people that you know, people in the government who torture for one reason only, because they want to. They want to. For whatever dark, nefarious, insidious reason, they will. And they'll wrap themselves in the flag and other, try to grasp other motivations that raise it to some level of nobility, and it can't. But if you want to know how this happened over and over again, but prepare to be disturbed, disappointed, and maybe debilitated by it. But anyway, that's my concluding comment.
Well, Catherine, Steve, thank you very, very much for sharing your time with us this morning. I learned a lot from what you had to say, and I hope that all of you found it intriguing and interesting and educational as well.
And let me add my thanks from behalf of the law school, and kind of ending with where we just did, I think is valuable in the realization that very often there are political desires that simply don't match up with reality, and the challenge is trying to get those together. And that's, I hope, one of the things lawyers can contribute to. So thank you, Steve, Catherine, Dave, all of you. Very much, most appreciated.
Thank you.
I apologize.